spaces and webinars to analyze UNAMA's role and mandate. More importantly, we conduct consultations with 380 women and men inside Afghanistan, gathering their perspectives on UNAMA's effectiveness and the expectations of the people of Afghanistan. Purpose of today's webinar is to share insight from these consultations and highlight the voice of those inside Afghanistan, to discuss how UNAMA can improve its mandate to better serve the people of Afghanistan, to urge the United Nations to engage with all Afghan groups and actively facilitate a credible political process, and to address the current crisis in Afghanistan. The future of Afghanistan depends on inclusive engagement, accountability, and international commitment. Afghans need a political pathway that represents all communities and ensure that protection of fundamental rights. I sincerely thank all participants, speakers, and organizations for joining this discussion. We hope that the insights shared here will help shape UNAMA's action in a way that benefits the people of Afghanistan and contributes to addressing the ongoing crisis. Now, I hand over the session to Ms. Rasooli, who will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you. Ms. Rasooli.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Khawari Saib, for the excellent introduction of Faragir and also opening the webinar for today. I would like to welcome everyone in the audience. Hello and Assalamu alaikum. We have today the webinar on the Voices from Afghanistan, the perceptions and the expectations around UNAMA role and mandate in Afghanistan. My name is Farzan Rasooli, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. First of all, I would like to go through the agenda very briefly. So after this, we will be having a brief presentation on the policy paper that we have prepared. Ananya Kundu, she will be presenting it. And after that, we will start our panel discussion where our distinguished panelists will speak on different questions that we will be posing to them, and we are looking forward to hear from them. Once the panel discussion has ended, then we can receive questions from you, and our panelists will respond to your questions. And after the question answer session, we will be wrapping up and closing the webinar. So before going to the introduction of the panelists, I would like to introduce Ananya, who will be presenting the policy brief. So Ananya Kundu, she is a feminist researcher, activist, and young peace builder based in India. She works in the space of gender, peace and security, human rights, and gender justice. She is the founder of the White Dot Solidarity Network, a youth peace collective, and she is a youth advisor at Global Institute for Women Leadership at Australian National University. So the floor is open, and Ananya, please, I would hand over to you to present the policy brief. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rasooli, for the wonderful introduction. Please allow me just a minute so I can share my screen for the presentation. And I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
We can see it.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm here today presenting Faragir's policy brief on strengthening the role and mandate of the UN Assistance Mission for Afghanistan, centering civil society voices for a gender transformative approach. I want to keep my presentation fairly short and focused on the main crux of our report, which consists of the findings and the recommendations. Speakers before me, Ms. Masuma, has already given us an overview of our purpose of conducting this consultation and what we hope to achieve through it, along with a backdrop of the current situation in Afghanistan and the importance of UNAMA's role. So I'm not going to go through that, but what I will be talking about, starting off with, is how this policy brief has been done. We have been using a feminist policy analysis methodology in our policy brief. We have attempted to have diverse voices present here. Faragir's community level consultation process has encompassed a range of approaches to reach a broad and diverse scope of community perspectives, expertise, and technical knowledge from within Afghanistan and its global diaspora. Consultations have taken place from November of 2024 to February 2025. We have reached out to 200 women inside Afghanistan across 20 provinces through focused group discussions. We were able to reach 146 men and women inside and outside Afghanistan through a survey, and 30 CSO representatives who were consulted through an FGD in Kabul. We conducted 6 key informant interviews with experts. Along with that, Faragir had organized on 14th of December a Twitter space titled Examining UNAMA's Role in Afghanistan Post-Taliban, and a webinar on 16th of December 2024 on strengthening the UNAMA mandate, which also gave us some information and insights from the participants. Additionally, following the January 20th, 2025 executive order to halt US foreign development assistance, which will have a potential critical impact on the delivery of humanitarian assistance as well as to a coordinated multilateral approach to Afghanistan as a whole, we reconvened 60 of the participants from our community level focus group discussions in early February in order to hear their concerns about this development. So now I will dive right into our findings. Our first finding focuses on human rights approach and restoration of women's rights. The current women's rights crisis in Afghanistan was the single most consistent theme which was raised across all our consultations. 99% of respondents said that UNAMA should use its multilateral position to advocate strongly for the restoration of women's and girls' rights, with particular importance placed on access to education and employment. Respondents felt that UNAMA has been vocal and consistent in monitoring and reporting on the human rights situation in the country. They understand and acknowledge the challenging context in which UNAMA operates. However, some respondents believed that the lack of accountability and continued engagement by UNAMA and UN member states have emboldened the Taliban to continue suppressing women with no or minimal consequences. Overall, there was widespread consensus on the need for a human rights-based, victim-centered, and restorative approach in both the UNAMA's activities and with regards to its engagement with the de facto authority. While many felt that UNAMA's monitoring and reporting was served as an important purpose, UNAMA's failure to take any action to put pressure on the Taliban for its arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, or the suppression of women's rights undermines that mandate. The challenges of accessing up-to-date reality on ground was also acknowledged by a majority of respondents, which is 67%, as you'll see, while also highlighting the increased engagement with the community and establishment of local partnerships as the way forward. Our second finding relates to policy incoherence and weakening UNAMA mandate. A common theme that we have found in all our consultations was this response that there is inconsistency of approach, tone, and priorities of UNAMA and other UN agencies, as well as a gap that exists between the policies and commitments which are made on paper versus the implementation of UNAMA's mandate on ground. A majority, which is 74%, agreed that the UNAMA mandate is strong, but Less than half, which is 46%, felt that it is currently working effectively to fulfill that mandate. In our expert interviews and survey responses, what we saw was the challenges that are posed by bilateral relations of some member states with the de facto in maintaining consistency, as well as the UN-led Doha meetings, which removed the pressing issues of inclusive governance, political dialogue, women's rights, human rights in order to bring the DFA to the table. As you see, the current format of Doha meetings, it was found, was exclusionary, where only the DFA, the UN and international community have been invited, and Afghan voices have been highly sidelined and excluded. Even the topics on the agenda have included topics which are only of interest to the international community or to the de facto authority, but not to Afghans. One respondent very strongly said that the Doha meetings should be the strongest manifestation of international community's interest in universal values and not the weakest. In spite of the challenges posed and the dramatically altered circumstances that we are seeing in a country, a return to the spirit and purpose of one UN for Afghanistan approach could help to counter these perceptions and foster for a unity of purpose amongst the diverse stakeholders. Many respondents also shared the view that UNAMA could be doing more to press for the implementation of an already strong mandate that they have. Next finding is on collaboration, partnership, and information sharing. Inclusive dialogues and engagement with diverse stakeholders are a vital step and a crux of UNAMA's ability to operate effectively in Afghanistan. But nearly 43% of our respondents felt that UNAMA was effective or very effective in consulting with relevant stakeholders. At the same time, in our narrative responses that came through the focused group discussions, our data found out that there is a need to diversify both the types of engagement as well as the demographic groups with which UNAMA has been engaging, with a particular emphasis that needs to be put on women and women-led organizations and movements. 78% of our respondents said that their input had not been sought, and nearly less than a quarter, which is 23%, said that they had not had any opportunity for engaging with UNAMA as a coordinating body. Respondents in our focus group discussion also mentioned that emphasized on the importance of establishing a robust mechanism to consult with Afghans across the country and ensure that their voices are included, with a special focus on marginalized groups, women, youth, civil society, ethnicities, religious minorities, and more. 80% of our respondents said that Faragir's consultation was the first time they had been consulted on UNAMA, and 98% stated that they would like to know more about UNAMA, indicating a potential for dialogue and grassroots engagement. Our final finding stems from transparency in engagement and information sharing. Many respondents felt that trust in institutions and agencies associated with UNAMA would be significantly enhanced, and the delivery of the services could be more effective if UNAMA increased transparency in regarding stakeholder engagement, including the ways in which UNAMA has been identifying the stakeholders and holding those engagements and taking part in consultation and wider activities. 56% of our respondents felt that there were regional disparities in the way that UNAMA engages with civil society. One such quote from a participant said that a more systematic approach must be taken in engaging with diverse voices across the country and not just in Kabul. Respondents see a role for UNAMA in encouraging and facilitating information sharing with NGOs, local civil society, and grassroots women-led initiatives as a key step to strengthen its way for working and a stronger future mandate. Now we will come to the end and the most important part of this policy brief, which are our recommendations. We have 6 which stem from our findings. First is the most important one: restoration of women's rights should be a top priority. The renewed mandate must prioritize the restoration of women's rights. It must mandate UNAMA to engage with civil society and women across Afghanistan and continue amplifying their voices. The reversal of their gender apartheid policies, including all decrees and policies which specifically restrict women's rights. Recommendation 2: that engagement with the DFA must be principled. Ensure that engagements with the DFA are not used by them as an opportunity to gain legitimacy. UNAMA can recognize and use the leverage it holds with respect to humanitarian assistance and use it to cautiously engage from a stronger position while also preventing the interference of the DFA in aid delivery. A renewed UNAMA mandate can set benchmarks for the restoration of women's rights and clear modalities towards this as a core function of its offices. While they may need to interact with the DFA, their approach should prioritize the interest and rights of Afghan people and particularly the marginalized communities. Recommendation 3 is that Doha meetings must become an inclusive and comprehensive process. UNAMA must work to remain neutral and independent, avoid any influence it might have that can compromise their role. Encourage transparent and inclusive dialogue between various Afghan factions, including united voices of all Afghans, especially women, youth, and ethnic minorities. Recommendation 4: equip communities across the country to be part of UN consultations. In order to meaningfully engage with stakeholders at the community level, invest in resources and programming to build capacity, and equip communities to meaningfully participate in these consultations. The communities can become equal partners in implementation. In this way, UNAMA will be working towards building sustainable relationships with the community and ensuring that their work and advocacy is directly informed by people who are most impacted by it. Second to last, our recommendation 5 is engage collaboratively with diaspora, people in exile, especially women. UNAMA must find constructive ways to engage those who were forcibly displaced from Afghanistan since 2021, as they continue to be active in driving the vibrant civil society in exile and has played a key role in continuing global advocacy on Afghanistan. They have ground connections with communities in Afghanistan and are able to bring in voices from within the country without posing security risks. So there should be a greater effort to collaborate. Our last recommendation is facilitate regular briefings and dialogues with diverse stakeholders. UNAMA should improve its communication efforts, ensuring that both the Afghan population and the international community are regularly informed about its activities, challenges, and progress. Transparent and accessible reporting will build trust and encourage broader support for its mission. By holding regular civil society briefings and facilitating information sharing among NGOs, local civil society, and grassroots organizers, UNAMA can support coordinated and complementary responses and interventions. There should be security and safety component that is a part of all of it. But we believe that if these recommendations are taken into account, UNAMA will not only be able to have a stronger mandate, but implement their already strong mandate in a better manner. Thank you so much. This is the end of the presentation. Of the Ms. Rasuli, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ananya, for the very informative presentation and for sharing the findings with everyone. So we hope that all those recommendations will be taken into consideration. We would now go to start the panel discussion. Before starting the panel discussion, first of all, I would like to introduce all of our panelists, and then we will go to the questions. And at the end, as mentioned earlier, we will have the question answer. So first, our first panelist is Dr. Nasir Andesha. He was the Deputy Foreign Minister of Afghanistan from 2015 to 2019, and he continues to hold the title of Permanent Representative of Afghanistan to the UN in Geneva for the officially recognized government of Afghanistan. He served as the Vice President of the UN Human Rights Council 2020, and he is also a co-founder and senior advisor of the Center for Dialogue and Progress in Geneva. He received a doctoral degree in diplomatic studies from the Australian National University in 2015. Andesha was a Fulbright Fellow at the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M University. I believe he hasn't joined us yet, and he will join us later on, but for now, I will just carry on with the introduction. Our second panelist is Nasir Ahmad Faik, who is the Charge d'Affaires at Afghanistan Permanent Mission to the United Nations in New York. Since joining the Afghanistan Foreign Service in 2015, he has held key positions within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including roles at the UN and the Regional Cooperation Directorate. He played a vital part in Afghanistan's election to the Human Rights Council in October 2017. Mr. Faik holds a bachelor degree in administration and diplomacy from Kabul University and a master's in administrative science from Fairleigh Dickinson University. He was appointed in December 2021, and he continues he is committed to advancing Afghanistan's interest internationally. Our third panelist is France Bognon, who is the interim CEO at the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN. She has over a decade of experience in offering technical support to peace-building organizations, from training on gender responsive programming and monitoring and evaluation to tailored strategic advice on institutional sustainability. Prior to her current appointment, France was the program director for the Innovative Peace Fund, IPF, which focuses on supporting women-led peace-building organizations. She co-authored Funding Women Peace Builders, Dismantling Barriers to Peace, and accompanying operational guidance, and contributed to the Fund Us Like You Want Us to Win. Our last but not the least, final panelist is Mitra Mehran, who is a prominent activist from Afghanistan with over a decade of experience in international development, peace building, and gender equality. She was a finalist for the 2021 Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought by the European Parliament. As a co-founder of the Feminine Perspectives movement, she advocates for the inclusion of women in intra-Afghan dialogue, in intra-Afghan peace negotiations, and promotes sustainable peace through intergenerational dialogue. Despite being forced into exile due to Taliban return to power, she continues to champion human rights by advocating for international accountability and gender apartheid. So I will start, I believe, yeah, so Ambassador Andesha is here with us, and so we will first of all go to him, and I would like to pose my question to him, and the question is, first of all, welcome Ambassador Andesha, and we are happy to have all of you with us, and I will start the first question with you. So, evaluating the UNAMA's performance in upholding human rights in Afghanistan, usually we hear from experts about leverage. So can you please tell us what these leverages are and how they could be applied to make Taliban accountable for respecting and upholding human rights, particularly for women? So the floor is open, and we would like to hear from you, Ambassador Andesha.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Rasuli, and my greeting to everyone, and also appreciation to the organizers of this webinar, to our colleagues at Faragir, but also my greetings to the panelists, my colleague, Mr. Fayeq, Mitrajan, and other colleagues. I think before going to the very specific human rights aspect of UNAMA's mandate, I would like to remind everyone that UNAMA, after August 15 of 2021, is a sort of extraordinary mission because the mandate was approved in 2002, but then later on in 2004, it became what it is right now. And this is a United Nations Assistance Mission to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. So it's actually the job of UNAMA after the transition process was to help a recognized and democratically elected government of Afghanistan in its journey towards democratization and upholding human rights and basically development, so the whole of a UN activity. So since then, it is somehow continued. So there is some sort of a legal ambiguity in the mission, because is it a mission towards the Taliban or how it continues? I think I'll just keep that as a sort of background question. And ever since, UNAMA has focusing in 4 areas, and now you're focusing on one of them. So the mandates always continue to have at least these 3 major pillars, which are now trying to extend it into the 4th, but 3. One is the humanitarian, which is a very dire situation in Afghanistan. So UNAMA, as a sort of political mission, sort of covers all the humanitarian organizations and humanitarian activities in Afghanistan. The second is the political part of UNAMA. UNAMA's job is to look at the implementation of other UN resolutions, but also to work toward the peace building and creation of an inclusive government in Afghanistan, reaching out to all the political sides of Afghanistan, all the relevant stakeholders of Afghanistan, including the Taliban. And I think if you listen to the statements by the spokesperson of the United Nations, he said, our job is to keep engaging, political engagement with all political sides of Afghanistan, including the Taliban, which I think they're completely failing on that part. And then the other relevant part is the human rights, monitoring of human rights. Of course, they are not in a position to do the protection and promotion. The only thing I think they are doing right now is monitoring the situation. And that's I think what your question is. I think on that question, basically we really appreciate, at least this aspect of UNAMA's mandate, an aspect which is, of course, under a lot of pressure, but still the colleagues there from the Office of the High Commissioner are doing their best to come up with, with regular reports. They will go to thematic areas, but we understand that this is, a sort of a bone of contention within the UNAMA mandate itself too, because I'm sure, and I've heard that the other aspects of UNAMA, particularly the humanitarian and some sort of humanitarian passports, they don't like the human rights side, because human rights is the one which is not something very much liked, actually abhorred by the Taliban. But despite that, reports are coming. The Office of the High Commissioner is coming up with these reports. Some monitoring is possible. I've always said, in my statements that, what reports are coming out of Afghanistan is the tip of the iceberg. It's not sufficient at all, because we understand that in one point, particularly the UN humanitarian leads used to tell us that, we have access now. Now the access question is solved. We can, be everywhere in Afghanistan, and it was sold at least in 2002 and 2003 as a big achievement for the UN, that we have, access everywhere. The question of access is no more constrained. We can go to all the parts which we couldn't go. But I think a year after, even the OCHA people are telling us that, look, access to geography doesn't mean access to vulnerable population. We can be escorted by the Haqqani, some Badri force, which is now I think even that been replaced by some other force, by Kandahar, that we could be anywhere we want, but it will be escorted, and they will tell us who to meet, where to be. And that was also the case with the special rapporteur when he could go to Afghanistan. I think he was always everywhere escorted, and the people who come to see him in the governor's office were, of course, the people who were selected. So access was no more, and still is not a sort of a leverage that the UN was talking about. So the human rights side, the human rights monitoring, with the little access that they have, I could still see it as a valuable work. I could still see that that adds credibility to the work of the Human Rights Council here, and to the work of Richard Bennett, who is the special rapporteur, who all of has been banned from visiting Afghanistan since August last year. So to make it a leverage, one thing that as somebody who worked here now for 5 years within the Human Rights Council representing Afghanistan, I don't particularly see human rights to be used as leverage. I think human rights is a principle, it's a universal principle, and it has to be sort of applied universally and independently and without any discrimination. So I would probably say it in a different way, that coming and reporting on the abuses and on the violations of human rights and the international humanitarian law by the Taliban, which in the past 2 days we were discussing this in the Human Rights Council, including a report on Taliban's so-called promotion of virtue and protection of prevention of vice, is something that increases the possibility of accountability. And I think when it comes to the accountability, that is basically a leverage, in a sense that the Taliban who continue to perpetrate these violences should know that the international community, the international justice system, the international basically civil society, if not all the states, are watching them, and there are some actions to be taken. Could this be not only sort of a punitive aspect of international action, and could also have some positive or basically encouraging aspect to it? I would say yes. I think one is that the human rights work would, beside the accountability, beside helping a transitional justice system in future, is to have the somehow an element of prevention in it. And this is what we hope, that when the Taliban leaders, when those perpetrators see that the international justice system is behind them or after them, it will discourage them from further atrocities. I think that's a prevention aspect. And then also it will encourage those who think that, even within the Taliban ranks, if there are people who think that, what their leadership and what, some specific ministries are doing is even beyond and above their level of, extremism, so they could come out and raise their voices, for example, on laws which actually takes the Taliban toward international courts, and with the indictment of their leader and their chief justice, the possibility of even this government being recognized at any time become more slim. So the Taliban understands that with Ayatollah at their helm and Haqqani as the chief justice, and the two ministers of education and higher education, there is little chance. So if that is sort of on a different way, in a negative, positive way, an encouragement for others to stand up and to question their own leadership, which we can see slowly, is probably leverage, which could be used for a way forward, perhaps a way toward establishment of an inclusive and representative government in Afghanistan. I think I will stop in here. If there was specific questions, then I'll happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Andesha, for the wonderful remarks. We would now go to the second panelist, who is Nasir Faik Saib. And the question that we have for Mr. Faik is, I will read it here. Yeah. So, Mr. Faik, you heard consultation findings about the Doha meetings. Do you think the Doha is a credible process for leading a political pathway for Afghanistan? If yes, what are the achievements of Doha meetings? And if no, how can UN start a credible political process for Afghanistan? The floor is open to you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to start by thanking you, Ms. For great moderation, and also I would like to express our appreciation to Faragir for conducting this meeting, organizing this webinar, and also conducting the policy brief. And also I would like to express my warm regards to all the co-panelists in this webinar. It's really a great initiative, and we really appreciate this. It's happening in a timely manner because the UNAMA mandate will be extended before 17 March, and the negotiation is already going on the extension of the mandate. And it will help us how we should convey a united message to all stakeholders at the Security Council when it comes to the extension of UNAMA mandate and the role of UNAMA in Afghanistan. Before going to the particular question of the Doha, I would like to add also that the UNAMA, as Ambassador Andesha also alluded about the UNAMA background, before August 2021, UNAMA had a different role based on a legitimate government, and the original mandate established for implementation of the Bonn Agreement in 2002. And then during the time it evolved. But in August, after August 2021, of course, everything changed. And the mandate of the UNAMA that was adopted in March 2022, Resolution 2626, is the really outlined almost a new mandate based on the framework of already existed mandate. And that time, of course, Afghanistan was going through a different situation, and particularly humanitarian situation, human rights situation, economic, and all these crises were happening, and is still happening, of course. And based on that, the priorities were outlined. And of course, in these priorities, the UNAMA mandate in Resolution 2626, it captures all priorities and issues that are important. Coordinating of humanitarian assistance, addressing human rights issues, reporting. And one of the issues which, it's of course based on the three pillars: humanitarian and political and human rights. So on the political rights, unfortunately, on the political pillar, we really have the expectations are really high, and unfortunately, UNAMA has not been able to to deliver the mandate that was given to the UNAMA. And obviously, first of all, we would like to acknowledge and thank the United Nations presence in Afghanistan and UN agencies, programs in general, and also particularly the work of UNAMA and the colleagues really continuing their jobs in a very difficult situation under the regime of the Taliban. But we cannot say that it is satisfactory. We have high expectations because some of the mandates, which is the political dialogue or the political pillar, has not been, of course, achieved, or the mandate that's given the tasks, there is no progress. And in 2023, the Secretary General, of course, was asked by United Nations Security Council to conduct an independent assessment. And then based on the Security Council resolutions that was adopted, Resolution 2679 and also Resolution 2621. These resolutions really asked the Secretary General to present or conduct an independent assessment with a forward-looking recommendations for a coherent, independent approach within international partners and also towards the Taliban, towards an international engagement. How should the international community engage with the Taliban based on a united and coherent approach? That's why this roadmap was developed, and the Security Council asked Secretary General to propose, or in consultation with all the stakeholders, appointment of a special envoy. Because the reason, of course, we know that, first of all, there were discord or disagreement between the Security Council members or international partners towards engagement with the Taliban, and also within the United Nations system and development partners, how to coordinate their humanitarian assistance and all these basic needs, the aids, international humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. So of course, the Secretary General conducted 3 special envoys meetings, two in 2023, one in 2023, and 2 in 2024. And unfortunately, based on the mandate of the UNAMA and also based on the Security Council resolutions, it stipulates that the UNAMA or United Nations should consult with all key stakeholders. But unfortunately, this was not. This didn't happen because we saw that the past 3 Doha meetings or the special envoy meetings was not successful, and they were influenced by the Taliban's preconditions. And UNAMA, of course, if you look at the mandate of UNAMA, the priority Part C and Part D very clearly asks that on the political dialogue. It asks that provide outreach through good offices to facilitate dialogue between all relevant Afghan political actors and stakeholders. And unfortunately, we saw that the women representatives, civil society representatives were sidelined and they were not present at the Doha. Of course, there was a side event, but they were not involved or present at the main discussions. So on this, we, of course, expect that the Doha or the special envoys meeting that they basically originally aimed at uniting or adopting a coherent approach within international partners and also on engagement with the Taliban should really take into consideration of all Afghan stakeholders. And also I endorse the suggestions or recommendations of the policy brief, fully endorsed, that was already prepared by the Faragir, that UNAMA is right now the only legitimate or credible international organization in Afghanistan, and they have to consult and engage with all Afghan stakeholders, not only with the Taliban, to really focus on formation of an inclusive government with full and equal participation of women in any process. And that resolution, the resolution that was adopted in the Security Council, it clearly asks that with full and meaningful participation of Afghan women in all processes throughout. So this is, unfortunately, has not been happening, but we hope that in the next round of special envoy meetings, right now the Secretariat is working on a roadmap, and we hope that they really engage with all Afghan stakeholders inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan, and they, in order to, of course, adopt a united and coherent approach or a roadmap that can lead to achieve a prosperous and stable Afghanistan. So I will stop here, and if there was any question, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faik Saib, for all the information on what we expect from the Doha process and what were the drawbacks so far there. So that was very informative. And now we would like to go to the third panelist, to Franz Bognan. And my question from Franz Bognan is, so Ms. Bognan, the administration that initiated the peace deal with the Taliban is back in power in the US. Is there any way that Afghan women and the civil society could engage with the new administration and shape its policies towards Afghanistan and convince them to hold the Taliban accountable based on the Doha peace deal? We would like to hear from you on this specific question. Floor is open to you.
Thank you very much, Farzan Jan. So just to be clear, I actually was coming to speak on the importance of the neutrality of UNAMA and how we can ensure that. I can address both a little bit, so I'll try and integrate that as well. But I just wanted to open with a thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be a non-Afghan woman asked to share my views amongst such an esteemed group of speakers. And I hope that my Afghan sisters would agree with my comments and feel that I'm representing them well. My thanks as well to the hard work and commitment of Faragir team and this publication of a very important brief, which is incredibly timely, in part given the administration. I can jump on that. Actually, let me do my comments on the neutrality of UNAMA, and then we can get to the current administration in the US and how we can potentially seek avenues of engagement, despite some of the unpredictability that we see at this time. And I think that some of the comments will feed back into this. I wanted to kind of set or concur with what my colleagues have said before, which is that the role of UNAMA has never been more critical, nor more contested. And its neutrality is truly a central pillar of legitimacy and of its ability to work and fulfill its mandate. The problem is that neutrality cannot mean silence or passive engagement. These are two very opposite, actually, beliefs, right? So in the current Afghan context, where women's rights, human rights, civil society space are systematically dismantled, neutrality actually in this case means ensuring that all voices, especially those of Afghan women, are genuinely included and heard. I think we can all agree with that, but I do think that we need to ensure that when we speak in international spaces, that we understand what neutrality means. The biggest concerns around UNAMA failing its mandate have been pointed out by several of the panelists before. There's the lack of transparency. The difficulty with this is that UNAMA has not been open about their engagement with the Taliban, who they're talking to, what is being discussed, how decisions are being made. And what happens is this creates distrust, particularly among Afghan women and civil society actors. The second issue is that they have selective engagement and exclusion, actually, of women. The Doha process was a glaring example of this. UNAMA led the process and made the deliberate call not to engage women, despite and in contradiction of a mandate that supports inclusive governance and human rights. The third point or concern here is the questionable leverage that UNAMA has over the DFA, or the questionable relationship. If UNAMA truly had a working relationship with the DFA, why did it fail to even mention the PVPE decree before Doha 3, a policy that directly impacted those discussions and women's rights? So there are many in civil society that question whether UNAMA has the influence that it says it does or should have, or whether it just chooses not to use it and thus is ineffective. All of these issues undermine UNAMA's neutrality and credibility. And as we said before, neutrality cannot mean bypassing Afghan women or treating their rights as secondary issues. So the question for us here is, what does UNAMA need if it continues to function in this way? How can we get to a space of neutrality so that it regains that trust, right? And it has to be, the engagement has to be inclusive, transparent, and accountable. I think the number one point, which some have mentioned here already, is really the genuine inclusion of Afghan women in civil society. So UNAMA isn't a gatekeeper, right, deciding which organizations are valid and can come in. It should facilitate a broad inclusive process. And actually, my organization, ICANN, the International Civil Society Action Network, has a document called the Better Peace Tool. And some colleagues who are here might be familiar with it. But essentially, it is an easy to navigate guide that sets out meaningful steps to how to ensure an inclusive process, not a tokenistic one, but an inclusive process that outlines truly how to identify civil society representatives. So to ensure its credibility, UNAMA has to defer to women-led civil society actors who have the trust and access in the communities that they serve and the communities that UNAMA is meant to serve. This includes women inside Afghanistan and women in exile. As the policy report showed, right, which our colleague shared earlier, most Afghans who were consulted most Afghans didn't feel they'd been consulted. And I think it was 98% wanted to know more about UNAMA. So UNAMA should really be tapping into women's networks and organizations and leveraging them more than they do, in part because of the continued response that women's organizations have in responding to crisis in Afghanistan. Despite the myriad of efforts of the DFA to erase Afghan women from the country, they remain incredibly strong and committed and impactful, right, truly. And I have to think, if they've been able to accomplish everything that they have despite all the odds against them, imagine if they were actually able to work and engage in a meaningful way. But moreover, UNAMA should be leveraging relationships with Afghan women because they continue to be intimately invested and woven in the communities that UNAMA is meant to trust or to respond to, right? These women's organizations have the trust and the access that UNAMA needs to engage both in the diverse and meaningful consultations that they're committed to, but also to reach and inform Afghan citizens about their role. So there could be a much better partnership here between UNAMA and women-led organizations that doesn't exist that would really help UNAMA to fulfill its mandate. It's also important, just one note, and I'll get, I know I'm going to run out of time, but I also want to note and reflect the influence that Afghan women have had. And I think quite contrary to how much of the news portrays them, particularly in the international fields, they are actually an incredibly powerful source of actors who have influence in Afghanistan. And they have influence not just in their own communities, but internationally as well. I've heard from reputable sources that one of the greatest fears of the DFA is a revolt or an uprising by women. And I think that's justified. I think they should be worried about that. 3 other quick points that UNAMA has to achieve in order to have this neutrality, which is necessary for their mandate. Radical transparency. They need to publicly disclose discussions they're having with the DFA, particularly on issues of human rights. And it must be clear and accountable how they're actually selecting those civil society representatives for any process, not just Doha. The third is on operational independence. Referring to their ability to carry out its mandate, what this means is essentially how, like operational independence is, how can UNAMA carry out its mandate without undue influence from political actors? So this is also related to the leverage they have over the DFA. So if UNAMA has real influence over the DFA, they need to push for the concrete commitments on women's rights and participation. If it lacks the leverage and it's not there, then together, let's rethink the approach so that we can communicate honestly about this, rather than, maintaining a facade of effectiveness of where they can leverage and negotiate. The last point is around having a new approach to international engagement. The international community needs to stop treating engagement with the DFA as an end in and of itself. A meeting that does not have meaningful outcomes, right, is not a success. It's a distraction that does more harm. So let's not pretend that sitting down at the table with the DFA is actually getting us closer to our overall objectives, right? So why does this matter? UNAMA's neutrality is not just about diplomatic positioning. Really, it's about the future of Afghanistan. If it continues to bypass women, it will fail Afghan civil society, but also its own mission, right? And the issue that I see is that without transparency and clear outcomes, and if this engagement remains with women remains tokenistic, right? Then the engagement actually risks legitimizing the Taliban rather than holding them accountable, right? Because they're engaging with them, which then reduces the leverage that women have. And if there's no UNAMA, so right, let's say we took away UNAMA or they weren't able to achieve their mandate, that might be healthier than if they can't actually achieve the mandate because it doesn't do harm. And it allows civil society actors, Afghan leaders, and other international stakeholders to focus their time, energy, and resources on mechanisms that will work and meaningful processes. So I guess the question for us here is, are we better off with the UNAMA in its current form? And if it remains opaque and ineffective, then maybe yes. Or if they're willing to change, commit to real transparency, inclusion, and accountability, then there's still a role to play. In my perspective, this is the test. Will UNAMA uphold its mandate and amplify Afghan women's voices, or will it remain an enabler of a system that really continues to erase those voices? The choice is on UNAMA. The world is watching and evaluating, but we have some time. I imagine I'm at time for Hazan. But just to add to your question before, okay, we can maybe.
So you finished? So
yes,
are you
yes.
done with the speech? Okay. Yeah, so I believe you already spoke on the neutrality side, and I believe the time is almost up. So we will see if there will be any further question in the question answer session on the Doha deal and how the new administration is working. If you want to like very briefly talk on it in a minute or two, I believe we can still give you some time to speak on it. Or if you are done with the speech and
I would be happy to address it. Let's wait for the others. I want to make sure others have time. I know I took more, and then we can. If that works.
Yeah, we can also do that. Okay, then thank you so much, Franz Bognan, for all the information you provided. And now we will go to the fourth. We will pose the fourth question to Mitra Mehran, our final panelist. So, Mitra Jan, as someone who attended the second Doha meeting, what are your observations about the role of UN in leading and facilitating a political process of Afghanistan?
Thank you, Farzanjan, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks to Nargis John and the team for a very timely report. I think as the date for the extension of UNAMA mandate is coming, and as Ambassador Fayek said, our negotiations are already going on. So it's very timely and it's very important to have the report out, and so the people who are doing the negotiation hopefully take it into consideration when they are doing their negotiations. We had some engagements in the past week, and I had one at 9 this morning with different countries in the council about it too. And one of the main concerns was how some of the countries are not even mentioning as much as they should the issue of human rights and women's rights and inclusivity. But at least from my engagements, I was happy to hear that we have allies to do that, and there are people who are pushing. I think everyone spoke about it, so I'm the last speaker. I will keep it brief. The credibility of the Doha process, which UN in New York and UNAMA and from Afghanistan are leading it, was incredibly in a very negative way questioned when the third Doha happened, where we didn't have women in civil society participation, and neither in the meeting nor in the agenda. And the other concern is that even the technical working groups they have created or different issues, they say that, you know, when among those discussions, they're gonna mention and address the women and human rights issues, but there is no guarantee that they will or do it. Everything that we see in terms of the agenda, in terms of how the working groups are framed, of course, is very conciliatory towards the Taliban in their demands. In terms, if we are saying a private sector, something funny happened was I had one of these calls with one of these countries yesterday, and they were like, "Oh, the presentation actually in the private sector working group was very compelling, and the design was good, and the Taliban very smartly started how many women have joined the private sector or doing businesses." And I was like, you know, we really expect the member states and people who go to those working groups to see the content of it, and also the enforcement and the commitment Taliban shows to those claims they make with their fancy presentations. And that is very key, I think, in terms of going forward with the credibility of Doha process is questioned. But going forward, now I think Ambassador Fayek said that too. We are hearing that UNAMA is working on the roadmap. The question is, if they want any credibility for that process, how they are ensuring that it's their processes or mechanisms they are taking forward is gender responsive, it's inclusive, it reflects the human rights, women's rights, and demands of people of Afghanistan. And also, are they committing to the values and the principles that they that organization is designed based on those that we unfortunately we don't see it. And the alarming concern is if UNAMA is responsible for that process at some point, how they make sure that people are included. I think in the first presentation about the report, you saw the alarming number of how 78% of the respondents said that they don't see their inputs included in any of the UNAMA's responses. And also how 98% of the respondents that the report engaged said that they needed to learn about the UNAMA. So the whole thing UNAMA sells out there is saying how they are inside Afghanistan, how they're consulting with the people in Afghanistan, and 98% of at least this respondent of this report says that they want to know what UNAMA are doing. I think they're very selective with who they talk to, and how we had a series of consultation with some people inside Afghanistan and some NGOs. The interesting thing that came up was they were like, maybe UNAMA, we have this quote keep coming from the NGOs working inside Afghanistan, is the UNAMA is only considerate of their own survival. They don't care what the people of Afghanistan wants, how good the quality of the processes is. So focusing on Doha process. So going forward, if there is a Doha process that be like, functional, and if we are actually visioning something for it, or the country is envisioning something for it going forward, few things that are more important. First, I think Human Security Council, in addition to other countries that are stakeholder to the case of Afghanistan, civil society, including us and everyone else, make sure that they be very transparent about the processes and mechanisms they put forward in terms of consultations and the demands and the priorities, because we are also hearing the international community is working on their priorities to be considered in the process in response to the priorities that will come from the Taliban. So that is one thing that is more important. If international community is working on its priorities, is it priority of people of Afghanistan? Is it reflective of the demands of civil society and activists and religious and other different minorities and groups from Afghanistan? Is it the priority of just settling something and going about it? That's one thing. The second thing is also making sure, because if the events are happening in UN, I am sure Ambassador Fayek is witness of that too. What really bothers me is like the people who come from UNAMA, namely SRSG, I want to mention it now. Her speeches are very conciliatory and sympathetic towards the Taliban. So they do not, UNAMA anymore does not reflect the whole in an inclusive voice from Afghanistan. So they need to make sure that they bring another briefer that can represent women of Afghanistan and civil society going forward. That is more important. And then the third thing is if there are working groups happening, I think we need to question the presence and membership of civil society and activists in those processes, because I think for me and for a lot of people, at least I engaged to, Doha already has lost its credibility, but now that we are not gonna have, at least from what I heard from speakers and what I have heard from my engagements is, we are not gonna have a special envoy that Secretary General appoint, and if the roadmap is getting created by UNAMA, so we need to make sure that UNAMA do present its consultative processes and how it's inclusive and how everyone's voices are included in the process. I am happy to receive questions, and again, thank you, Nargis John and team for the very timely report.
Thank you so much, Mitra Jan. We would also love to hear on this question that I posed to Mitra from the rest of the speakers. However, I would like to call on Ananya, so she can also bring up if there are any more questions or comments in the chat box. And if there are not lots of questions, then maybe at the end we can look at this question to pose it to each of the speakers. So Ananya, can you please share the questions in the chat box?
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible. So there is a lot of discussion.
Ananya, I think she got frozen. Okay. Yeah. So until Ananya gets back, I would like to very briefly hear from like for a minute, very briefly from each of you about the question that I had just posed to Mitra, which was about the your observation from the Doha meetings. I believe all of or most of you have participated in the Doha meetings. So what are your yeah, Ananya is also here,
Yes.
and we can also join that remark
Yes.
with the
I'm
answers.
so sorry, my internet just shut off for a moment. So there is no targeted question yet, but there have been a lot of back and forth comments, and I just want to share some of those reflecting comments from the attendees in the chat with our panelists, that there seems to be a really high level of disappointment amongst the attendees who have shared that can Afghanistan really anymore depend on the UN and then again on USA, since we have seen the current political situation, and if people within Afghanistan, the civil society, should find greater ways of actually negotiating with the de factos, so girls can at least be allowed to study or work. So because the situation is not going to change much, that is what's coming from the comments. The second part that I have noticed in the chat is that because UNAMA's work mandate, none of it, in fact for the UN, is legally binding. So participants are questioning if there is any merit to doing any advocacy on this end at all. And the final comment is also on the situation of women's rights, to say, can UNAMA do some form of negotiation or advocacy with the de facto to allow changes to happen while keeping their argument for Islamic law in mind, so girls can at least attend schools. So these are the dominant discussions that have been happening. If the panelists would like to comment on any of it for the attendees.
Yeah,
May I?
go ahead, Faisal.
Thank you. So I didn't go to the details in the first round because I wanted to hear the questions and also the comments. But I would like to be very specific. As our position with close consultation with all of the Afghan stakeholders, including Afghan women, is that we, since they started, UN started the Doha or the special envoys meeting, we had really high expectations because to really acknowledge that the leadership of the UN, the Secretary General, the DPPA, they really have strong commitments towards Afghanistan and Afghan women and the situation, resolving the situation of Afghanistan. But they rely on UNAMA because UNAMA is on the ground and they are providing recommendations. The Doha process and the first meeting, Secretary General was very clear and very specific, and he also even didn't give up to the conditions of the Taliban. But once the recommendations from the Kabul, from UNAMA was received, it really diluted the negotiations. That's why we somehow boycotted, and we still would like to call on all Afghan women and other stakeholders that we should not endorse the Doha process by participation of these side events, which women are not invited in the main table or in the main negotiating table, but they are invited as a side event and in the meeting to just somehow legitimize or the discussions with the Taliban. That's why the first thing is that we, all Afghan women representatives and stakeholders or civil society, including our mission, our position is that we are not supporting this Doha process that was diverted from the original objective that international partners, first, our position was that we would like to support the Doha process as long as it really focuses on adopting a coherent and united approach with close consultation with all Afghan stakeholders towards international engagement with the Taliban. Once they become united, and then they start negotiation with the Taliban, how to engage with them. But they didn't do this first. Secondly, then without forming any cohesion within the council or key stakeholders, they invited the Taliban. So Taliban really misused or got the advantage of this disunity among the international partners, and then they posed their own conditions. And unfortunately, it really provides the platform for normalization. And then the colleagues from UNAMA, they started working on some working groups, on 2 working groups. But our proposal was that you have to include you have to include the human rights, the women rights, particularly under one team, and there should be another working group. But they disregarded. That's why we completely boycott that one. So my and our position is that if UNAMA is not engaging with all its stakeholders in full contradiction to its mandate, then why we should legitimize, or Afghan women should, or representative legitimize this Doha process, which is misleading and legitimizing the Taliban. So we have to engage with the leadership of UN to either, even if the UNAMA mandate is extended, but it is not implemented effectively, it would be useless. So 2 suggestions. Either we have to suggest that all our position must be to emphasize on UNAMA's leadership, and they cannot fulfill the expectations of Afghan and international community, or the leadership of UNAMA must be replaced. So we have to start working towards these 2 objectives until we can really, because this is the only, UNAMA is the only mandated mission. And for that, it should not be only according to the engagement with the Taliban and the will of the Taliban, but it should take into consideration the full demands of all Afghan people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faik Saib. So the rest of the panelists, just considering the time limitations, we will have 3 minutes for each of you to just present your final remarks on this question that Ananya shared. Thank you. Andesha Saib, please go ahead.
I'll follow up on what Faik Saib said, that the Doha process, now that we see only the two working groups of functioning, to me, it looks like more like, you know, a group of people playing with two tires of a vehicle, you know, of a car, which was, if we can look at the Friedun Sinrili Ghuluz report, and then the resolution 27, I think 21 of February last year, I think around this time, 29, basically, it was like tomorrow, it created sort of a comprehensive roadmap, a vehicle toward what it was called returning Afghanistan to the international community, international system. So it means that, you know, it was at all aspects of returning Afghanistan to the international system, which included political, you know, human rights, civil society, women's rights, but at the same time, you know, some aspects of economic and financial support. So again, you know, if that's a roadmap, if that's a vehicle to move Afghanistan from point A to point B, what happened after certain rounds of the Doha meetings was that the Taliban actually, you know, did not accept other aspects. And the only two things, which is good for them, and that is, you know, a working group on private sector and a working group on perhaps on counter narcotics or whatever they call it, or climate change, which actually brings funding for them. So to me, it seems, you know, completely a dysfunctional remaining of a Doha, supposedly a Doha 2 process. And I echo what Mr. Faik said, that, you know, we should not even waste our time with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Franz Bognan?
Yes, maybe I can take a minute, since we'll hear from Metro John as well, on engaging Trump, engaging the current administration, if I may quickly, because I felt that I wanted to answer that in case the audience was looking. I think two big things. As everybody knows, Trump's administration was instrumental in orchestrating the Doha 1 dialogue in 2020, and he pushed through and signed for an agreement on withdrawal of forces. He is adamant about being able to fix and correct the errors that were done in the fall of Kabul in 2021. And I'm not sure if you saw, but just recently, he ordered our defense secretary of the US to fire anybody who was engaged, any military leader who was engaged in the 2021 withdrawal. I think for those who would like to leverage US advocacy, point to his signing of the agreement and what he committed to, which was to a peaceful transition. And then also in 2017, under his first administration, he signed the Women, Peace and Security Act, the first one that the US has ever had, which requires women's inclusion in peace and political processes. So it's another advocacy point. And third, I would go towards security, regional security, citing the increase in counterterrorism measures, as well as economic security. All of the people that Trump wants to be better than, China, Russia, India, Iran, are all engaging right now in Afghanistan, and he's not. So it's a very quick answer to a very complicated question, but I wanted to make sure it was out there. Thank you, Faraz Zanjan.
Thank you so much, Franz Bognan. And Amit Rajan?
Thank you so much. So I know everything is very disappointing as we struggle every day. There are different fronts to fight for, but I think if there are certain things that UN is violating its own mandates, its own commitments, the report that Friedun put out, even everything that has been mentioned there in terms of making sure that all human rights and conventions that Afghanistan as a state party are committed to are respected, none of them were considered in the Doha process going forward, or we do not see that reflected in any of the the UNAMA work on the ground. They want to go forward, but only with the things that they see can be, can work with the Taliban. So they work around everything to make sure it's just conciliatory towards the Taliban. So they have a discussion, and we see that they even have failed to manage any high-level political discussion or negotiation or whatever they name it with the Taliban leadership. I mean, the highest people they sent to the third Doha was the speaker of the Taliban, and they compromised that our rights, our demands, the civil society, and all the population of Afghanistan for them. It's not that they are receiving anything in return, while I believe standing by the people of Afghanistan, by different resistance groups inside Afghanistan and the civic resistance that's very, very active. I think that also bring power to UNAMA to be able to, speak with the Taliban. Now, as an entity, speaking with the Taliban would be very different than as an entity that you are connected with the strong voices of people of Afghanistan and the women of Afghanistan. That we see obviously is lacking. But I want to echo on what Ambassador Fayek said, the civil society, what we can do and we should do is often maybe we are also, if we need to mobilize better to proactively engage with the UN. We need to, if there is a special envoy that Secretary General is supposed to appoint, we maybe vocally ask for that we haven't. And the other thing that happened, I think, is the UN do not engage civil society as much as they should. And 2 days ahead of Doha or a week ahead of Doha, announce few names. And that doesn't give us to mobilize better to address the issue. What happens is we get mad, civil society makes some noise on the Twitter, and that's it. So there is no strategic mobilization before and after the Doha event for different reasons to respond to the situation. Something that UNAMA supposed to actually do in its consultation, which is clearly failing to do. That's one thing. And then I think it's also necessary, I would say, for us to engage with different countries that are part of the Doha process to individually keep them accountable. And there is why, and that's why pushing accountability mechanisms importance come in, that civil society and women of Afghanistan and men, of course, Dr. Sebandesha doing an amazing job in Geneva, is using them to not only keep the Taliban accountable, which we should, but the accountability mechanisms are important, that we make sure the countries that are participating in Doha, they abide by their international obligations, that they are clearly failing to do so. So I think at some point we need a civil society of Afghanistan and women activists to do more mobilization and approach with force in terms of how keeping the UN and international community accountable to, as much as we want to keep the Taliban accountable, because these are the parties that gives, the pathway for the Taliban's normalization and going forward. That would be my take.
Thank you so much, Mitra Jan. That was all wonderful. So we would very briefly discuss not all the points, but some of the major points that we heard from the speakers. It included we discussed that having access to the geography, it doesn't mean that we were able to respond to the individual needs of the Afghans who are inside Afghanistan and even in diaspora. So access is not everything. There is need for to respond to the individual needs. And we talked about inclusivity, that engagement with diverse groups across the country hasn't happened yet, and mostly the UNAMA has been limited to Kabul. And we also discussed about the human rights is not a leverage. We discussed that it is a principle to be applied universally. And it's important to ensure accountability is in place to prevent the human rights violations in the country. On the political pillar, we discussed that the expectations are not met, and there is a need for UNAMA to be engaged with, as we said earlier, with diverse groups, with different political groups, and ensure everyone's voice is heard. We also discussed about the sidelining of the women groups and the civil society representatives in the Doha meetings. The lack of transparency and openness was another challenge that we highlighted during the discussions, but it was highlighted by the speakers. And this lack of transparency and openness have led to the distrust between the Afghans on the work that UNAMA is doing. So it's important to ensure openness, and especially the selective process of UNAMA was flagged by some of the speakers, that UNAMA has always been very selective when it comes to the meaningful participation of the women and the civil society groups in the Doha meetings. And there is a need for consultation with wide group of the people, and that consultation and that process needs to be very strategically administered in advance with the opinions and the views of the people of Afghanistan. We also thought that whether we need to rethink about whether we should boycott, or the leadership of UNAMA is needed to be changed, or UNAMA has to decide to be inclusive. Otherwise, there is no benefit to continue with this process, which is not making any change or not meeting the expectations in right. So that was some of the points from the group discussions that I have noted. And in the meantime, we also had the policy brief, which had 6 main recommendations, and it was shared through the presentation by Ananya. I would like to quickly go through it. The first one was the restoration of women's rights. It should be a top priority for the UNAMA. We also had another recommendation on the engagement with the DFA. It should be principled, and the Doha meetings must become an inclusive and comprehensive process, and it shouldn't sideline the different diverse group. We also discussed about to equip communities across the country to be part of the UN consultations in the policy brief. And the 5th recommendation in the policy brief was to engage collaboratively with the diaspora and people in exile, especially women. And the last recommendation in the policy brief was to facilitate regular briefings and dialogues with diverse stakeholders. We would call on the UN in general and the state members to listen to the Afghan voices and take these recommendations into account. Even if there were criticisms, there were lots of points that our speakers mentioned. I believe it's all for the betterment of the mandate of UNAMA, and also for a bright and good future for Afghanistan. With this, I would like to thank everyone, including the panelists, the presenter, the organizers of the webinar, and everyone who worked out on the policy brief. We would like to thank the audience who patiently stayed with us till the end. We have already posted the policy brief on the Faragir website, and it's also available on the social media handles from where you can download and read it in detail. So we will be closing with this, our webinar, and I wish you all a very good time ahead, and thank you so much for your presence in this important webinar. So thank you so much, everyone, and I wish you a good time ahead.
And Ramadan also Mubarak for
Thank you.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan Kareem.
Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye.